Welcome to the first in our two-part series, what we're calling a reading and action series entitled Contingent Faculty and the Fight to Remake Higher Education. A reading and action series inspired by the great scholarly and activist work congealed and presented in this book I'm sure many of you have heard of, Contingent Faculty and the Remaking of Higher Education, a labor history, edited by Eric Fuhrer-Slocum and Claire Goldstein. You'll be hearing more from them in a moment. I am the welcoming guide, and you'll be hearing a little bit from me later as in a facilitating role. I'm Joe Ramsey. I am a full-time contingent faculty on a continuing appointment at UMass Boston in the English and American Studies departments, where I'm a senior lecturer and have taught for about 10 years. With you after a long day of teaching, as I'm sure many of you are here, which is a tribute to our commitment collective to be here, even after our long days of 3, 4, 5 classes, and God knows how many commutes between campuses. I want to thank you all for being here. We have almost 70 folks here, 140, I think, registered. Undoubtedly, we'll be gaining folks throughout the evening. I hope that you can all stay with us. This will be the first of a two-part series. The next event will be in March, on March 14th, also a Thursday at this same bat time here, same bat place on Zoom. That event will presume that you've read a little bit of this book. Tonight's event does not presume that you have read the book. You will be hearing some presentations from the editors, the co-editors, as well as 3 selected contributors to this very important volume, a volume I will not say much about, but just to say it both addresses how we've come to the place we are today with contingency and super exploitation in academia, what it's like to be where we are now, and also what can be done and what is being done to transform we are now to get to some better place. Tonight's event will feature short talks from our speakers and then a robust half an hour for open, gently guided breakout sessions. We are considering this not just a speaking at you event or to you event, but a speaking with you event. We're here to listen, and we will be trying to take away the key questions, proposals, ideas, and hunches that emerge out of our collective intelligence through the facilitated breakout rooms that we'll have in a moment. Before I pass you over to Eric and Claire, I just want to say that I'm here part of a kind of coalitional effort to bring you tonight's event. Tonight's event is sponsored by Higher Ed Labor United, HELU, of which I am a member and an organizer. Also within HELU, it was organized in part by the Contingency Task Force, the CTF, as we often call it, a group that is building and growing and really trying to center the concerns of contingency within the broader HELU coalition. HELU, as I'm sure many of you know, is a group committed to bringing together existing unions and organizations with the goal of creating a wall-to-wall and coast-to-coast higher education movement. So I hope if you are not aware of HELU, you will you can write to me or others who are on this call who identify themselves as HELU. We would love to get you in the loop with HELU and with the Contingency Task Force. I just put my own email in the chat box, and please do not hesitate to write to me directly. In addition to HELU sponsoring this event is sponsored by the Center for the Study of Academic Labor at Colorado State University, one of the co-hosts of tonight's event. Also, it's being sponsored and was promoted by CFIS, as I understand it, a group within the Labor and Working Class History Association, specifically the Contingent, and see if I can get this right, Contingent and Community College Faculty and Independent Scholars Joint Committee. And of course, it is also brought to you by the organizing of the co-editors and contributors of this volume. I think I'll just wrap up by saying it is my view, and I believe the view of HELU and most of us working in the Contingency Task Force, that we see contingency as a threat eroding the public good and the mission of higher education. It is a plague, a problem that affects some people more than others. Most certainly we have many differentials in how faculty conditions are and are lived today, depending on the type of institution, the region, location, job category, department, institution. But we do believe that the vast majority of higher educators, as well as staff and students in our higher education institutions, share a common interest in transforming and overcoming the abusive exploitation of contingency and the growing menace of precarity that is increasingly affecting all faculty, though not all equally. And so I'll just leave it at there and pass it over to Claire and to Eric, who will be your guides into the next part of the program.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Joe, and really do want to thank all the sponsoring organizations, HELU, CSAL, and LawChaw, the various groups within those organizations that have pulled this together, and the organizing committee for this event too. It's been a fantastic task force to work with, and we really appreciate that. Also want to thank right at the beginning of this, because I know a number are in attendance, the superb contributors to this book. Claire and I are really grateful for the fine group of people we've had the chance to work with, and we continue to be impressed by the work that they've done and their ability to put up with us over the many years of putting this book together, including through the hardships of the pandemic. And we're especially eager now for this opportunity to see this new book, to be a part of an important conversation, such as the conversation tonight, both about the state of contingency, really, but what we can do to remake higher education as well, so that academic workers get a fair shake, so that students get the educations that they deserve and that they need, and that colleges and universities can start to reclaim their vital public purpose. So a quick word about the book before I turn it over to Claire, who will then introduce the presenters, who are all contributors to the book. Contingent Faculty in the Remaking of Higher Education examines academic work, contingent academic work, and does that particularly through the lens of labor history. So between a set of bookend essays that situate the book in the larger context, and then with personal accounts threaded really throughout the book as well, the volume tries to narrate, or works to narrate, the history of contingency in higher ed. It does that in 3 different parts. First, the political economy and structure of contingent academic labor. What caused the rapid rise of contingent labor in colleges and universities? Second, we look at adjuncts' day-to-day experience and struggles in the academic workplace. How precarious labor and the low status of contingent faculty shape our everyday work life and workplace experiences, right? And as Joe referred, there's a wide range of experiences, but there are some common elements there too, which we really want to tug at. And then third, looking at contingent faculty advocacy work, organizing, and collective bargaining. In what ways are we fighting for better working conditions and for higher ed's public purpose? Or, as Claire so aptly summarizes all of this, so I thank her for these words, how we got there, what here looks like, and how contingent faculty are taking action. And with that, then I'll turn it over to Claire to introduce the presenters.
Okay, thank you, Eric. So I'm just going to introduce Gary Rhoades, Aimee Loiselle, and Anne McLeer, who all had chapters in the book and are going to be doing the presentation portion. And so I'm just going to briefly introduce all 3 of them now, just so that once we get speaking, we don't break that up with introductions. So Gary Rhoades is a professor at the Center for the Study of Higher Education at the University of Arizona. His work addresses the restructuring of academic institutions, occupations, and professions. He has published Managed Professionals, Unionized Faculty, and Restructuring Academic Labor. And he co-authored a book with Sheila Slaughter, Academic Capitalism and the New Economy. Gary is a former AAUP General Secretary and New Faculty Foundation board member, and he currently works with various national and local unions. Aimee, who is involved with HELU, is an assistant professor of history at Central Connecticut State University. She studies the modern United States with a focus on women workers, gender, and race in relation to transnational labor and capital. Her book, which recently came out, Beyond Norma Rae, How Puerto Rican and Southern White Women Fought for a Place in the American Working Class, examines how commercial cultural production marginalizes alternative narratives. Aimee taught as an adjunct professor while completing her dissertation. And I can also say that she was just recently elected to the LACHA board of directors. And last but certainly not least is Anne McLeer, who's probably the person most responsible for getting me involved in activism around contingent faculty, is the Director of Higher Education and Strategic Planning at SEIU Local 500 in the Washington, D.C., Maryland area. And there she oversees the higher education work of that union. Anne earned a PhD in human sciences from George Washington University in 2002. She has taught in American Studies, English, and Women's Studies as a part-time faculty member at George Washington University. And Anne has also served on the board of New Faculty Majority Foundation. So I want to thank each of them for their presentations. And now I feel like you've all been very patient with these multiple introductions. So I think I'm turning it over to Gary rather than back to Joe. Is that right? Let's go with that. All right, Gary, you're up.
All right. Thank you, Claire and Eric and Joe and all. I'm delighted to be part of this volume and delighted to be part of this event. And I think part of my task is to, like in the book, provide sort of a broad overview in the role of contingent faculty in the academic labor movement, which has just in my lifetime moved from the margins to the center. So I think it's pretty clear that contingent academic employees, really first in my view, contingent faculty, and then graduate and postdoc employees have really moved to the vanguard of the academic labor movement, and they're pushing us in all the right directions. Before going on, I'll just briefly say I'm also a member of Local 7065 of the United Campus Workers Arizona, of Communications Workers of America. So we're a wall-to-wall group. It's not collective bargaining. We're in Arizona, but it's collective action and hell raising, and to some good effect, I think. And I want to say something just briefly about HELU, because I think this is a great example of how over the last 20 years, academic labor has expanded to embrace coalitions that cut across all employees. And so I think it's such a valuable movement and such a valuable set of lessons about how we actually affect change in higher education. So I'll go to the chapter and lay some foundations. And the first one I want to lay is, over time, as you probably all know, most of you live, or we all live in one way or another, a fundamental transformation in the academic workforce. From when I started back before the internet, back in the early 80s, roughly 2/3 of the instructional workforce were tenure stream faculty. And obviously we've hit the reverse. We're at the point now where, as Maria Maisto has coined and written about in this volume, in fact, we are now faced with contingent faculty being the new faculty majority. Now, what's important about that is more than just the numbers. It's that these employees have moved from what Caprice Lawless once said at an event in Colorado, actually, that I think Sue and others helped organize. So she's an adjunct activist, and she goes, we need to go from awfulizing to organizing. And so it's one thing to have large numbers. It's another thing to organize and to move from recognizing and feeling how exploited you are and sharing those sentiments to actually organizing in ways that challenge and change and transform the system. And so I think that's part of what this volume offers. Before going about how contingent faculty in a variety of ways have done that, and I'll try to talk about maybe 3 brief ways. But before I do, one thing about that transformation in the workforce is the demographics of the faculty are such that if you identify as a woman, if you're a person of color, and you're a faculty member, you are most likely to be contingent. That does not mean most contingent faculty are women and or people of color, but it does mean if you identify that way, you are most likely to be contingent. So we're seeing nationally, and we see the same thing with graduate employees and postdocs, who are even more diverse in those regards than contingent faculty. At just the time that the academic workforce is diversifying, we've closed the doors on basically primary labor market working conditions of job security, livable wages, and benefits. And this is happening nationally, of course. So what I want to emphasize about what has changed over time is various strategies in which contingent faculty have really modeled how to organize metro areas. So probably Anne will be talking about metro campaigns, about how contingent faculty have essentially taken over major locals, as happened around the turn of the century with the California Faculty Association, which Joe Barry and Helen Worthen have written about, and in the Professional Staff Congress, and also in UUP. I see that Ann Wiegard is on. So that's really important, that combination of existing bargaining units, experiencing contingent faculty, organizing internally, becoming more active, forming caucuses, and gaining more visibility and control over what the union is doing, what it's bargaining for, and the like. Also going beyond the campus in the ways that Anne probably will talk about with metro campaigns within regional areas, and also then forming national groups like HELU. But prior to HELU, there was a campaign for the future of higher ed that I was a part of. And prior to that, there was the New Faculty Majority, which really did this sort of, and Joe Barry is talking about this inside-outside strategy of forming this national entity, which then leverages change within each of the national affiliates or international affiliates. So those strategies, I think, are really important. Different strategies for how to organize workers whose lives are different than and distinctively, in some cases, challenging for organizing, but then realizing all the resources that actually we have available to us. And I'm sure the other presenters will talk about this, and you'll find that in the book as well. The last thing I'll say is the genius of this contingent faculty labor movement is to do something that my group of faculty has not been particularly successful at, which is to connect our interests to those of students and to those of the larger society. So the mantra of faculty's working conditions are students as learning conditions is a genius way to block the effort of management to divide us from the students we serve and the communities we serve. And in every campaign that I know of, those students as allies, or as Anne has suggested to me before, connectors, they are really a powerful source in coalition for providing public visibility to the conditions that we're in, that faculty are working in, and to why those are important. And they're fabulous allies and advocates for enhancing those working conditions. And we can see that also in working with other labor groups. But I think for the contingent faculty movement, if I was going to say there's one thing that is just remarkable in this David versus Goliath battle, it's that a small group of people, a small group of activists have consistently articulated this theme, which then the large swath of contingent labor has taken on, again, in just about every campaign that I know of. So I think what I'll do is I'll stop there, except to say the next step is to connect us to broader social movements. And I think really the grad and postdoc employees, which I write about a bit in my chapter, have gone even farther than contingent labor has up to this point in connecting academic labor and workplace justice to social justice, connecting it to Black Lives Matter, to connecting it to the Me Too movement, connecting it to international students, international workers' rights, immigrant rights, LGBTQ plus rights. And I think that is a step that we as faculty can also take in coalition with our allies. Thank you.
Aimee, do you want to?
Yeah, I wasn't
there.
sure if I should just jump in. Thanks everybody, and thanks Gary for that great overview and good inspiration on next actions to take. And I really want to thank Claire and Eric because they've been my role models of just persistent, broad, and steady action on behalf of, you know, contingent faculty and adjunct professors. They really were hammering away at this issue before it's become kind of the more hot topic it's become now. It still isn't enough, but it, you know, it's at least part of some big mainstream conversations now that we're seeing. With the piece that I wrote, I was asked to do one of the personal essays. I don't research higher education. I research, you know, working women in global capitalism. But when I did my personal essay about being an adjunct professor, one of the things I really wanted to bring into the piece was not just the idea of labor exploitation, which I think is obviously a crucial aspect, but I also wanted to bring in the fact that this is also about budget practices at the state level and at the campus level. And if we don't start getting more involved in the budget and allocations, we're not going to be able to make the same level of difference. And because one of the things I started to research, I'm in the community college I was in, had a union, and we had adjunct faculty control their own contract and negotiations, and full-time faculty do theirs, but we were in one union. And what I found was it was impossible to get certain changes through, and I couldn't figure out why we couldn't get them through. And so I started to research Massachusetts state law. And what I found was when they created adjunct positions for community college faculty in the state of Massachusetts, it was in the 1970s. And they created this special category called Division of Continuing Ed Faculty. So that's what all adjuncts were called, DCEs. And in order to make the community colleges want to offer evening and weekend classes and to hire professionals who are like nurses or lawyers to teach some vocational classes, they basically made the decision that every tuition dollar paid in a class taught by a DCE would stay on the campus. It would not go to Boston to be part of like the larger pool. Whereas every tuition dollar taught by the full-time faculty had to go into this, like, so this is all like budgetary allocation. So this isn't just about exploiting labor. I realized I was like, oh, this is about the austerity shrinking of these state budgets, that when these community colleges are squeezed and squeezed and squeezed by the lack of revenue and support at the state level, what are they going to turn to? More adjuncts, because that allows them to control more of their tuition dollars on their campus. And when I realized that, it's of course even more infuriating. And it also explained why, you know, that even when adjuncts were organizing in Massachusetts, and even when we could negotiate contracts, we couldn't get certain things to change on our campuses, that we were still getting, you know, really bad employment situations. So that was one thing I really wanted to center in the piece, is the experience of the personal exploitation, and the way, you know, at part 2 of the book really emphasizes the experiential side of being contingent. But that, and as you know, as all of those chapters argue, the personal is always part of these larger systems, and I really wanted to get at the budget side. But the other thing I wanted to emphasize was the fact that even adjuncts couldn't agree on what they wanted. Even when we could try to push for certain things, we had DCE faculty take over actually the top leadership positions in the Massachusetts State Union, the MCCC, which is part of the MTA. And even then, you had the adjunct faculty that were professionals who were like, hey, I just want pay equity because I have a full-time job and I just come and teach a couple classes a semester. Then you had the people that were like retired principals and high school teachers and veterans who had full pensions and healthcare, and they just enjoyed teaching, and they got very little little involvement in the union. And then you had people like me who wanted and desperately needed to survive a path to job security and stable employment. And none of those three groups could come to any agreement in the contract. And in the negotiations. And so the more I started researching and just learning, not as a scholar, but as like a contingent faculty, I start to realize there are multiple contingencies. This isn't just a tenured versus adjunct faculty situation. Even amongst adjunct faculty, we need to understand that there are different priorities. And we found this when we were organizing with HELU as well. Like some adjuncts would say, I don't want to ever be tenure track, or I don't want to be full-time. I like being part-time. I just want pay equity. So we were having kind of, these constant debates. And I think looking at part 2, you really see the range of the different tiers of adjunct and contingent and what you need to take into account as your union or as your worker group or as like a collective of faculty go forward to try to organize around budgets to find ways to speak across all those. And I particularly liked the idea of social dirt that was in Claire Raymond's, because that's also in my personal essay. The level of discomfort that I gave tenured faculty when I just existed in the same room with them. Like they knew that I wanted more job security, and they knew that I was as all these chapters say, we have to teach, publish, we have to have the same training. We all go through the PhD programs if that's what's required in our field, or EDDs or whatever people might be doing. And yet they know that, and I know that, but I'm not supposed to make them uncomfortable about it. And as I started to get close to the end of my PhD program, one just blurted out to me when I said, you guys are cutting my sections. Like I used to get 3 or 4 sections a semester. Now I'm down to 1. And she's like, well, we know you need a full-time job and we can't offer you that. So we need to start phasing you out because your classes can't be taught. You won't be here. Now, this person was an economics professor who specialized in teaching radical economics. She was a social justice activist. She was constantly talking about Marxism. She had pictures of all types of Marxist scholars and radicals all over her door. And she said that to me without a bit of like irony about it. She just was like, this is the way it is. So I think that idea of social dirt's really important. I also really liked the Juarez chapter and the addressing ageism, because I think that's another thing adjunct faculty really face. It's not just your time out of research. If you're an adjunct faculty and you want to get into a more permanent position, it's not just, oh, I haven't been getting funding for research. That's part of it. But it's also that the older you get, you're seen as somehow not cutting edge, not like, a rising star or whatever it is that that department might use to justify their ageism. And I had somebody say that right to my face once, because I was a non-traditional PhD, and they were like, well, we really like rising stars. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry, I guess I'm just a dropping rock. So like, you're not interested in me. So looking at the way my personal essay kind of leads you into the second part, it really touches on a lot of those similar concepts. Like with the last thing I want to mention before my time runs out here, is that we don't have, and both the Hatton and Maystow piece talk about this, we don't have any procedures as adjunct and contingent faculty usually to pursue any type of grievance or pursue any type of request or effort for any kind of change in our circumstances. I heard once when I did a roundtable, somebody talk about how our students have really been groomed to like be surveillance rather than our allies. And so I really like the idea in the Maisto piece, and also like what Gary just said, we need to get students to see us as the contingent and adjunct faculty that matter to them, and that we're allies for them in their learning. Because right now we're often, as an adjunct, I felt like more like I was under surveillance. Like if I got a bad student eval, or if they went to the dean and said some kind of comment like Professor Loiselle's too hard or this or that, like I just would, not even have any way to even know the student did that, let alone, have my sections cut. So I'm really honored to be part of this book, and I'm really honored to be part of this part 2, where you really get a chance to hear contingent faculty themselves put themselves into like a systemic and theoretical framework and not have it be done to them. So thanks.
Cool. Thank you, Aimee. Anne?
Hi, everybody. First of all, I want to thank Claire and Eric. And it is true that I found Claire on the campus of American University, and she worked for quite a while organizing when she was still an adjunct faculty there. And, we learned a lot about organizing this workforce together. So it's great to be here. I just like everything Aimee just said. I'm like, oh, I've heard, how can I say this? The issues we're facing and the way we think about it and the words you're using, I've heard these. I'm not saying that in this way that we haven't made progress, but for so long, so much is still the same. So much that you've gone through, Aimee, and so many of you that have been in this world for, decades, and the new ones of you experiencing these kind of things. And one of the things that just came up in the chat that I have to address is this hating, or this, tension or rivalry between the tenure track faculty and the contingent faculty. So I'm going to say it, right? That's not the way to be thinking about these kind of things. Pablo Eisenberg, our old friend, called academia a caste system, right? It's not 2 tiers or 3 tiers. I say this in my essay. Academia is a layer cake, right, of different types of people doing the same work, which is educating students, but in different layers. You got your tenure track, and you got who are the people at the very top, then your contingent full-timers, then there's the different layers of contingent full-time people, including the rise now of contract faculty teaching 4 classes a semester with no service and no publishing requirement, yet they're rehiring. It depends on publishing. Down then through, there's regular part-time, there's grad students teaching, and then there's adjuncts at the bottom, right? So there's us having rivalry against each other from both ways is what the employer wants, because they want us to be divided, right? And we need to stand, in my essay, I'm going to talk about in a minute, we need to stand in coalition with each other, not just in coalition, we are the same, right? We're in the same boat. So here's my joke. And I apologize in advance. Either 1, you don't find it funny, or 2, you find it offensive, right? So the professoriate is like the Titanic, right? So the adjuncts, particularly, let's say, the worst paid, worst treated adjuncts in for-profit colleges, the adjuncts are the Irish in steerage, right? They barely made it onto the boat. There's like, it's a very bad conditions down there. They're sailing off for the USA, right? The contingent faculty, so that might be like second class, business class people on the Titanic, right? The tenure track faculty are the first class. I like to think of the grad students are sort of like the staff on the Titanic, right? But everybody's on a sinking ship, and that's what we have to keep in mind when we're coming together and talking about this, right? There's other people on our sinking ship too, but then that ruins my Titanic metaphor, so I'm going to stop there. So I guess I've never actually given a book talk before. So Claire asked me to write sort of about a little bit of the history of what we've done, which I think might be interesting for this group, and then sort of how things have changed for this book. And I was like, Claire, you wanted me to talk about the last 21 years of my life in 11 pages. And she's like, yep. um, so, sorry. And now she's like, and now I have to summarize the 11 pages in 8 minutes. So I guess I'll tell you a little bit about the history of SEIU Local 500, who we represent, and then if I have time, talk a little bit about the threads and the themes that I see continuing. For example, that there's not enough solidarity among the professoriate. And I mean, you know, I know that there's individual people can act badly, but that's no reason for us not to seek solidarity. Anyway, so SEIU Local 500 is a labor union in Maryland that in the year 2000 knew absolutely nothing about higher education or academic laborers or any of that stuff. They represented school support services staff, like bus drivers and paraeducators and food service workers at Montgomery County Public Schools. Today, this local union represents adjunct faculty, so part-time paid by the course people, regular part-time faculty, and contingent faculty, and some grad students in 10 institutions in the area. So Georgetown, Howard New University, GW, American, Montgomery College, hi Mitch, Trinity University, UDC, Micah in Baltimore, Goucher College in Baltimore, and McDaniel College in Westminster, Maryland, if you've ever heard of that. So we have a bit of a wide sweep of colleges. We have public and private, we have community colleges, and you know, 4-year research 1 universities. And I've been doing this work for the last 21 years. I think I've started something now with my comments. Anyway, whatever. So the 21 years ago, a group of adjuncts started organizing at George Washington University. And back then, there were, you know, as some of you might remember, and some of you might not remember back then, you know, there was no internet, there was email, right? No social media, et cetera, et cetera. And we set about to organize 1,200 adjuncts at the George Washington University. That was we were the third, and we were successful, obviously. We were the third adjunct only, what did you call it last night, Gary? Standalone adjunct unit in the country to organize after yeshiva, following NYU and NYU and New School. And we were the first standalone unit of adjuncts to affiliate with SEIU. And since then, our local has been growing on all these campuses and throughout the area. We knew at the time we had to organize the entire city. So we called ourselves the Coalition of Academic Labor. That word labor was very important. And I'll talk a little in a minute about why, because we knew we had to see ourselves as workers and not, that was key. And it still remains key to organizing faculty. So where was I? Right, yeah, so I've lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, we also had the guy who was like, I can't come to the union meeting because I'm going to write my essay on Marx in my over in my office. So if I look at the, you know, last 21 years, are there things that, what have we done and where are we going, right? Was kind of the question that Claire asked me to cover. So we started off really making things up as we go along, right, with organizing adjuncts. You can imagine back then, adjuncts were even more marginalized and separated from each other. One of my friends once said, we're like 1,000 little dots until we unionize and we come together, and then we you know, we're a picture. So we, you know, we broke a lot of the rules of organizing and all the rest, and we've learned a lot along the way, which you can, if you want to know what it is, you can read my essay. But I would like to sort of say that one of the things that I see still as a barrier to organizing faculty. It seems to me that this is largely an audience of faculty, right? And it was really big back then, is this myth of meritocracy in academia, right? So when we were organizing at GW, we got a lot of, unions are great in the 1940s for those people working in factories, but I'm a professor, right? What am I trying to say? In order to address this, we had to take from people's idea of I'm a faculty member and change it into I'm a worker, right? People's idea of I've got status in the world and change it into I'm exploited, which is a challenging thing to do, right? So I say in the book, we wanted people to fully imagine the extent of their disempowerment in the university system while also convincing them that they could wield effective power through collective action. So it's like you have to help people place themselves, see that they can be empowered by recognizing their disempowerment. That was a challenge, and I think it's still a challenge today. And part of the problem is this code of meritocracy in higher education. So back then when I was organizing, I was finishing up my dissertation. I was an adjunct. I had been told a year before I finished my dissertation that if I was still adjuncting and I didn't have a full-time job before finishing, I would never get a full-time job in academia, right? So this sort of cutthroat labor market where the universities are producing the PhDs and the MAs who go on to teach in the universities, right? And creating a pool of labor, particularly in a city like DC, where there's so many universities and colleges packed in together, to think that, oh, it's okay because I'm going to make it up the ladder is a huge barrier to actually changing the system, organizing and changing the system. I don't know how many minutes I have left. So we had to make sure, we had to know and help people understand that work, that your value was, so I get it, right? I spent 7.5 years doing my PhD, and then, right? And my parents like, why aren't you on, why don't you have a full-time job teaching in the university? And what's so hard about it? So the internalization of, oh, it must be me, and I've seen this at professional conferences, et cetera, is a really difficult thing to overcome when you're doing organizing with a group of faculty, particularly because there's a sort of a shame involved sometimes when people think that it's their fault that they didn't make it up the career ladder in higher ed. The interesting thing, though, I guess I'll say one more thing before talking about where we are now. The interesting thing is that this myth of meritocracy actually helped us a little bit when the colleges and the universities tried to fight us. Social dirt, yeah, that's a good term. When the colleges and the universities tried to fight us, they didn't really take us seriously, certainly at the beginning, with GW, maybe American, Claire, because they imagined that all the adjuncts loved teaching there so much, wanted a line on their CV, did it for the social status, right? And they just assumed that they didn't assume that there would be a mass movement of people feeling exploited, because they were trying to inculcate the myth of meritocracy and make people feel like, oh, I'm so important teaching here at GW for poverty wages, and I'm never going to get anywhere in my no, I might have a chance of getting somewhere in my career, right? So they didn't really take us seriously, and that was good. I think these days the administrations are taking they're taking organizing campaigns a little bit more seriously, but they still sort of fall into these traps of underestimating both the animus that faculty have against it, not necessarily that particular administration, but against the system itself, the system that we're talking about, as well as a lot of the external law firms that they hire, Claire remembers this at American University, right? They literally use this playbook from 1972 on how to beat, this as winning NLRB elections. That means the employer winning an NLRB election. And it's very, it's a very template, it's a playbook, and many faculty find it offensive when they get messages from their administrations touting this stuff. So that's works in our favor.
Anne,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, this is Claire. I hate to interrupt. Do you think you can wrap up in like a minute or two?
So there we are, the faculty organized. Yeah, adjuncts, then we've more adjuncts, then full-timers and grad students and all the rest. And recently, in the last couple of years, we started organizing staff. We started at American University. We now represent staff at American University and MICA, and we're organizing another second group of staff at American University. So right now at AU, we have grad students, adjuncts, 2 groups of staff organizing. This was, somebody mentioned wall-to-wall earlier. It was Gary. The wall-to-wall movement is the key to moving this forward. We've been doing this for 21 years, and the percentage, say, at George Washington University of adjuncts teaching courses compared with full-time faculty remains the same, right? The only way we're going to move this in my lifetime to what we want as faculty, as contingent faculty, equity and job security and all the rest, is to organize everybody else on campus. And I say this in the book, that we need, we need networks on campus. We need everybody unionized, maybe in the same union, maybe not. So right now we have our adjunct faculty are teaching at American University, paying their dues so that the service workers, the maintenance people, the bus drivers can join the same union, and that's massively powerful. The other thing is to create coalitions on campuses with the students, as Gary said, as I said, the students as the locus, as the connectors between all the workers that are on campus. And that's the only way we're going to get the power we need to do what we've been wanting to do for the last 21 years.
Great. Thank you again to Gary, Aimee, and Anne. Give them a silent round of applause. And then I think I am kicking it back over to Joe, who's going to talk about how Joe Ramsey, who's going to talk about how the breakout rooms are going to work.
All right. I'm glad to see so many of you still here, considering the abrupt way in which I left you a moment ago, or what feels like a moment ago. I didn't expect to be gone that quickly, but I'm sure you didn't need your hands held with the 5 questions I had drafted to gently guide your discussions. I know if you had any experience like I did in my group with Maria at Maisto and others, it was really a rich conversation, and I left off the conversation saying, I hope it's not the last time we talk. So I think what we had now, I'm not sure exactly how many groups. I think we had 7. If I'm, someone feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. On the schedule, we had 15 minutes or so for kind of report backs, which would be about 2 minutes per group. And then perhaps we could have a little bit of response time, after we hear from each group, maybe from a person or 2, depending on how you want to divide it. Maria, could I actually call on you? Maybe our group could start and we could share a few things. I mean, a couple of the questions I had, I'll just put in the chat box now, even though it's a little late, just so people can look at them. But some suggested things to think about maybe for next meeting would include these questions, which hopefully will show up now. No, it's a different link now, so forget it. Maria,
Yeah.
Would you like to share some highlights from our group? I don't know what our
Sure.
number. Yeah, please.
Sure, and thanks again for facilitating, Joe. So one of the question we started with were what are some of the obstacles to organizing, and we identified alienation, burnout, lack of union democracy, public misperceptions of higher education, the psychological weight and self-deception that we engage in with respect to our profession as in terms of meritocracy, status, et cetera. And then we also try to focus on proposals for action. And WeGuard held the banner up for making retirement reform a goal since ageism, as we know, is a huge issue in in contingent faculty, in the continued exploitation of contingent faculty, collaboration and solidarity with disability activism and other social justice movements, cultivate and encourage the change that movements like HELU and UCW are creating, learn from student activism across the board, like the Parkland students and students on campuses, choose one's battles in one's own work, reject the bullshit work and faith in a false meritocracy, and build solidarity with students. Change the internal and external perception of higher ed, work on clarifying and focusing on our messaging and our collaboration and solidarity, no matter where we sit on campuses, look for where we can unify. And at the end, we were talking a little bit about reaching out to people who have been on both sides or on lots of different positions within higher ed and outside, again, in order to continue building solidarity. I hope that captures it. And anyone who was in my group, please chime in if I've left something out.
I think that was a great review, Maria, and we will flesh out the Google Doc with what other notes we wrote down. But thank you so much, Maria, for that, and thanks to everyone who was in that group. It was really inspiring and generative. Who would like to go next?
I could.
Okay, great. John Holmes, take it away.
Yeah. And I'd like to say it was a really nice group. And the thing I liked most about it was that although we only had 7 people, absolutely everybody, all 7 participated in discussion, and most everyone, I think, spoke more than once. So it was a really good democratic discussion. So, and Paul Johansson took really excellent notes, and I'm simply going to read them. Facilitator John Holmes. What kind of actions do unionists need to take in order to achieve something? 2 polls or strategies to follow. Lobbying politicians, speaking up at board meetings, etc. The other is organizing for strike action. Real gains only come through strike action. Example, California, as in Trevor Griffey's chapter in the book. Paul Johansson. Full-time faculty are not really being as helpful as they think they are. They need to be more supportive of unionization effort. Lee Akins. Full-time faculty are clueless about how their lack of support impacts adjunct faculty. What actions can we take in order to be effective within the union? How to organize the part-time faculty in order for them to recognize how exploited they really are. I want to figure out strategies that work and that make a difference. Peggy Overstaller. It's the drive for the elusive quality faculty that drives national searches that ends up with institutions exploiting their existing faculty. Jennifer, U. Washington. It is hard to figure out who is part-time and who is full-time in the variety of experiences. I am here to understand how to figure out who else is even in the system. John Holmes, organized around common interests, academic freedom, cutbacks, etc. Have to get students, parents, staff organized, mobilized for education nationwide, not just higher ed, to advance the rights of part-timers. Who is most qualified? Second comment. Who is most qualified to teach? Those who have already taught a class or a course. Harry Bernstein. My college, CCSF, is under attack from the accrediting agency for the 2nd time in 12 years. There's a movement to get a slate of new members on the board of trustees, and it pins the accreditators against the faculty of the institution. John Holmes, how much money is the legislature going to give to the institution impacts their decisions regarding faculty. The argument that we can't afford it doesn't wash. We need to make them want to afford it. Wall-to-wall organizing provides the real muscle. It all boils down to that. We cannot shut down the economy, so key is broad support from the parents and support of education in general. Peggy Oberstaller. In Oregon, we have a very strong union for both full-timers and part-timers, a president who wants to fight for pay parity. The union helps to make me feel valued because they try and get us better job security. Harry Bernstein, move to 1-tier pay. CFT committee is discussing it and how to get it. Probably that summary is as good or better as any that I could give. If anyone else if we still have a few seconds, who is on that group wants to throw in a comment, please do so. Going once, going twice.
All right. Sounds like we almost had a transcript there.
It is a transcript.
So there we go. The live action. Great. That's group number 2, I guess. Could we have a third group? And again, if people could maybe we don't need necessarily hear everything. I think if we could isolate a few key points so we can kind of process and then maybe reflect a little bit, but it is great to get everything we can in those notes documents. So if you did jot things down, you didn't put in the Google Doc yet, it would be great to do that even after the meeting's done. We could kind of pull that. And the idea is not just to say a lot of things now, but we're going to funnel these insights and questions and problematics into the next event and to perhaps future contingency task force events we do. So please do take that Google Doc seriously. Okay, I filibustered enough there. Who would like to go next?
We can go next. Group one. I think
Okay,
Aimee Loiselle took some really good notes on this.
all
Yeah,
right.
I'll consolidate because as Joe said, there's some common threads. And so one was definitely that we need more coalition building. And as hard as it is to reach across all of these fractures or casts or tiers or whatever you want to call it, they've been imposed intentionally from the top down to make us fractured, and we have to find ways to build coalitions across them. And then also definitely with students, and we talked about some examples of, getting students more involved in everything from getting them more informed, but to getting them to testify at state legislatures. And also that it's important to learn some key language, so contract language, so that if you do get things like pay parity, that you also have language in there that it won't lead to cuts to that, the justification, we're giving more money here for pay parity, so this is going to have to go, and that there are contract examples and that there are examples out there. But we have to reach out to other unions to find that out so that we don't make mistakes in our own negotiations. And then, of course, the idea that we have to have an eye on the budgets at all times and not wait for like the administrators or the state to like release budget data, because it's always a crisis for them. Like it's, when it comes to the administrators and the state leaders, it's just always a crisis. And so we need to be tracking the budget data ourselves and demanding budget transparency so that we can not get sucked into that crisis mode.
Thank you, Aimee, to be proactive, not just reactive on that. That's really, really important. I want to mention before we go to the next group that this is not the last meeting of this group. We're going to have a continuation on the Thursday in March, which I believe it's the 14th. Today's the 15th, right? So it's the 14th. Also, the Contingency Task Force is organizing an event March 23rd, focused specifically on struggles of adjunct and contingent faculty at community colleges. And that will be an additional event, not strictly focused on this book, but building out of it and strategies we can take forward. In addition, I want to mention that HELU has its first in-person and online convention occurring May 17th to May 19th. And if you as an individual are not yet a member of HELU, or your union or organization is not, this is a great time to join. We're about to cross the threshold of 50 local unions that have become formal members of HELU, which is what's triggering our in-person and online convention. And so you really have a chance to get in a sense, it's at the next ground floor of HELU. We'd love to continue this conversation there. That's not a closer. It's just in case people start to drop off. If any of my co-organizers want to drop some HELU links in the chat box for people who aren't familiar, that would be very welcome. Who's next? We have a couple more groups to come.
I can go next, and I'll be quick given the time. And my apologies that I didn't get notes into the Google Doc. I can't seem to enter things, but I'll get that in later. But I think in our group, a good conversation as well. And it really was framed in some ways by an opening story of one of the members who had been contingent faculty for many years and had now landed a tenure stream job, and was talking about how heavy her load is, and had a comment then by the department chair that, well, if you need to drop a class, we could hire a contingent faculty to teach your class. And just in that sort of interaction, this sort of pitting against tenure stream people and contingent faculty. And so our conversation really did look at the different ways in which those tensions are very palpable. And they happen at the day-to-day level. They happen at the level of a more structural level as well. And so, the challenge of overcoming that, knowing that we do have to overcome that, and particularly the ways in which both sort of the myth of meritocracy and the mask of austerity right? Both of those become sort of ways in which that friction really is increased between contingent faculty and tenure stream faculty as well. And so then, you know, the part of the conversation turned to what are the ways in which we're going to build some stability, right, into this. And part of that is how do we begin to overcome some of those tensions, but also how do we build stability into, again, sort of contingent faculty life on the day-to-day basis? How do we do it in terms of on the campus, but also ways in which we need to, and that's through collective bargaining or other advocacy, but also that legislatures and other policymakers really need to be a target of some of this as well. And the example of health insurance certainly came first to mind, and an earlier group, it sounds like, talked about retirement as well. Some of those very real needs that have to be addressed. So.
Thank you, Eric. The myth of meritocracy and the mask of austerity.
Yeah,
I dig it. I'm with Helena, who wanted to make sure we didn't lose that very useful language. All right, I think we have a couple more groups to go.
I'll go next.
Thank you, Seth.
So I want to say this first. I'm going to take 30 seconds for a bully pulpit here. I had a conversation with the president of the AFSCME chapter on our campus about 7 or 8 months ago, during which at the end of it, I said, you know, is there any message that I can take to the faculty on behalf of your membership? And he said, yeah, make sure you tell every faculty member you ever talk to this. Every time you complain about how shitty we are at our jobs, you are telling management to outsource them. And we would really appreciate it if you would stop doing that. So like take that message home with you when you talk about, like, when you complain that they're like the bathrooms aren't clean enough, right? Or that the food's not very good or whatever it is. The people who are at the wrong end of those complaints are also they're more underpaid and overworked than or as underpaid and overworked as lots of us. So like be kind to your siblings on your campus. So our group, real quick, basically, like we talked about wins, and those ranged from, you know, like some pay improvements and job security improvements, to the point that sometimes you have to win legislatively in order to get things to have staying power, all the way up to the kind of large scale point that, like, right now the U.S. labor movement is in a pretty good moment in terms of like attacking and undoing the two-tier system. That both like the UPS wins and the UAW strike were very much built on that argument, and that holds an important. And Joe didn't put it this way, but like that sets a really high bar for the rest of us, I think, to rise to in terms that have been set for us. And that for me, I think, was probably the loudest takeaway from our group.
Thank you, Seth. Lots to process there. How many more groups do we have to go? Do I see? I think I see 2 hands. I see 3. Okay, great. Let me go to Helena's group.
Yeah. Quickly, the U.S. academia is a microcosm of the conflict, but also a cause of it. There's an awakening, a rising sense of class consciousness and analysis. We need a national movement. We need a coordinated bargaining program so we can impact differences in pay and working conditions. We need to see a big picture view and get a sense of a bigger structure. U.S. higher education is the epitome of the most dystopian aspect of the U.S. So that was where we went. But it's actually, this is actually an optimistic and hopeful set of responses.
Yeah, thank you, Helena. I mean, if dystopia is in our backyard, if we can turn it around here, we're turning around more than just here, aren't we? Claire?
Sure. So I'll just summarize. I'm going to pull out 3 themes that came up in our discussion, one of which has been touched on already in some of the other discussions, and that is the power of the myth of meritocracy and how that impedes organizing as well as coalition building. The other is to make sure that in organizing efforts, we consider STEM as part of faculty solidarity. I think a lot of activism around contingent faculty is humanities, comes out of the humanities. So trying to broaden our own view. And then lastly is, as someone pointed out, there's been comments made in the past that wall-to-wall unions are sometimes lead to some of the worst contracts and sometimes some of the best contracts. And how do we make sure that we end up with the best contracts if we're going to push toward a wall-to-wall model?
I can jump in with our group. We had a main takeaway was following up with Sue's idea of where does this resources go, the surplus, instructional surplus, or the surplus labor of contingent faculty. So we were looking at administrative bloat, support services, athletics, that there is a zero-sum game with tenure stream faculty. But one of the big interesting things was the idea that there's a lot going to credit agencies. So that larger structural problem that's way over our heads as part-time faculty. We had some general problems with general collapse of education in general, and that this is sort of a bad time. And some of these problems that we've had are beyond contingent faculty, and look at a long-term problem with racism in academia and general attacks on education. We had an example from Georgia. We're looking also at how to define equal pay for equal work, looking at the Vancouver model as an example. And proposals for action, they're pretty dour, but both Sue and I are saying, vote with your feet, just get out of academia. Now's a good chance. Now's a good time. That's all we had.
Do we have another group to report, or is that the last report that we have? Thinking that might be the math. Well, somehow I can't let leaving academia be the last word of this event. I mean, many of us don't have that option, I think, and many of us are committed to transforming this place despite the odds that may be stacked against us. Whatever your view of these questions is, I hope that you will return with us in a month, if not sooner, to continue this conversation. We'll have another short panel of speakers. We haven't, in fact, have not constructed that structure yet because we wanted to be responsive to the conversation tonight. And I think we have, based on those report backs, and haven't even looked at the notes yet, we have a lot to process, as well as a lot of energy from this group. So I'm really hoping we can have an even bigger, better event building on what was said and thought today. I know I have some new, fresh thoughts, despite my obsession with these issues, some new perspectives, and I hope that you do as well. So I just want to close. We're already 17 minutes. I guess we started 5 minutes late, 12 minutes over time. I don't want to impose on people's evenings anymore. I just want to thank everyone who helped to organize this tonight. Special shout out to Eric and Claire, and all the contributors to the book, as well as to Tracy Berger, one of our staff workers who's also HELU's staff, who helped to promote. If you heard about this event through a variety of avenues, if you saw the flyer for it, it's Tracy's work, and there are many other folks who I'm not going to name right now who did important work, not only the conceptual work, but the nitty gritty of getting the word out, posting things around, and making sure y'all would show up today. So if you would like to get involved with the group that organized tonight's event, or with the contingency task force of HELU more broadly, please do send me a note or reach out to one of the organizers or the co-editors who are also involved in organizing this event. It would be great to build our capacity as we go. Wherever we want to go, we know we need to build more capacity, more muscle to get there, whether the goal is a strike or other forms of organizing and strategy. I just want to say, if you're not a member of HELU yet, or if the word HELU, Higher Ed Labor United, is news to you, please check us out online, Higher Ed Labor United. And I think there's been a number of links in the chat. Hopefully you can find your way there. We will be having our first in-person as well as online hybrid convention in May 17th to May 19th. I hope you're a part of that. Whether or not you have been in HELU so far, we need you if we're going to make this wall-to-wall, coast-to-coast movement vision a reality. Thank you for being.
Where will it be?
It'll be at a couple. It's going to be. We're working on it. It's going to be a couple different hubs. There'll be in-person gatherings in a couple different places. I think the latest thought is kind of.
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead, Tracy. Take it.
Yeah, sorry. So we have not fully decided where it's going to be. We have two really great proposals from member unions to kind of house us on their campuses. in Detroit and New Brunswick. And so tomorrow we have a steering committee meeting where I believe that'll be one of the things that we're discussing. And I think there was some solicitation that went out to see if we got any other proposals for hosting at other places. So I don't think that's the full list. But
Okay,
I think
great.
we're only going to do one physical location is the
Is that
plan.
right? Okay, so there's been a meeting since I was at a meeting, because last I heard was there might be multiple. Okay, great. Thank you for that, Tracy. And we will keep you posted on that. Again, follow up. There's my email if you'd like to reach out to me personally. There's a number of HELU links in the chat if you'd like to follow up with HELU organizationally. Hope to hear from you soon, and I hope you all have a great night, whatever time zone you're in. Hope to see you next time. See you on March 14th for part 2. Read on, struggle on, y'all.